Um, okay, so let's unpack this. I want to start today's deep dive by asking you to do something that might be a little uncomfortable.
Oh boy.
Yeah, just I want you to close your eyes. Unless you're driving, please keep them open if you're driving. But otherwise, just picture the phrase national debt.
It's really not a pretty picture for most people, is it?
It isn't. I mean, if you're like me, or honestly, like most people I talk to, you probably just visualize that giant, terrifying digital clock in New York City. You know the one.
Oh, absolutely. The national debt clock.
Right. It's just ticking upwards faster than the human eye can even track. You're seeing these numbers with like 12 or 13 zeros behind them. You're seeing headlines screaming about impending doom.
Yeah, it triggers a very specific kind of anxiety. It feels like a runaway train.
Exactly. It feels like this massive, unstoppable force that is just going to eventually crush us. But here's the thing. We hear the numbers, 30 trillion, 34 trillion, but very few of us actually know how the machine works. We just know it's broadly bad.
Right.
So today, we are going to stop the train. We're going to pop the hood and look at the actual engine.
And that is exactly what the source material for this deep dive is all about.
Mm-hmm.
We've pulled together a stack of research, economic breakdowns, and articles that, frankly, aim to do something pretty ambitious. They want to move us past the panic and into the mechanics, the real nuts and bolts.
Yeah. The core mission today is to answer a specific question that came up in the readings. Is the national debt a debt pit that we're all just slowly dying in, or is it actually a trampoline?
I really love that metaphor, pit or trampoline,
Yeah.
because the answer, as we're going to see, isn't a simple yes or no.
Right.
It depends entirely on how the debt is used.
Yeah.
It stops being a horror story about big numbers and starts being a story about how a country interacts with its own future.
A relationship with the future. I really like that. So let's get right into the mechanics of it, because the first thing that really blew my mind in these articles is that my entire mental model of debt was just totally wrong.
It usually is for most of us.
I think most of us, and be honest here, we think of national debt like a credit card.
Yes, the classic kitchen table analogy.
Exactly. We imagine the government is just like a reckless teenager with a Visa card. They go out, they buy a bunch of stuff they can't afford, maybe some aircraft carriers, maybe some highways, and now the bank is calling to break their kneecaps because they maxed out the limit.
It is the most common misconception out there.
You hit it.
And it's intuitive, right? We naturally compare the government to our own household budget because that's what we understand.
Sure.
But the sources are very clear on this. National debt is not a credit card.
Yeah.
And it is not a standard bank loan like you'd get for a mortgage. The actual physics of it are completely different.
Okay, so if they aren't swiping some galactic credit card, what are they actually doing? How does the government get the money?
They are issuing bonds.
Bonds.
Right. To understand national debt, you really have to understand the bond market. You have to think of a bond simply as a product the government is selling. It's essentially a promissory note, an IOU.
Okay, walk me through that transaction. Like, I'm a buyer, they're the government.
Sure. So the Treasury says, hey, I need cash today to run the country. If you give me $1,000 right now, I promise to pay you back in 10 years. And because you're being so nice, I'll pay you a little bit of interest every single year until then.
So they aren't begging a bank for a loan. They're basically selling an investment opportunity.
Precisely. And this distinction changes everything because of who buys these bonds. When I think of the credit card analogy, I imagine, a stern bank manager judging me.
Right, checking your credit score.
Exactly. But with government bonds, the real question is, who are the lenders? Who is actually giving the government this cash?
See, this was the part that shocked me in the readings. Because I usually imagine, I don't know, some shadowy figure in a boardroom in a foreign country. Or maybe a rival nation holding all our debt and just laughing at us.
Yeah, that's the movie plot version of economics.
Totally.
And sure, foreign countries do hold some U.S. debt, but the source material points out that the answer to who are we borrowing from is actually much closer to home.
Yeah, the sources listed some really surprising players, like banks are on the list, the central bank itself is on the list. But the one that really stood out to me was pension funds.
Pension funds are massive buyers of government debt, and insurance companies too.
So wait, if pension funds are buying the debt, that means we are the lenders, like regular people.
In a very real sense, yes. If you have a 401k, if you have a state pension, or just a standard retirement account, there's a very, very good chance that a significant portion of your money is invested in government bonds.
Wow.
And why? because they are considered risk-free. They are literally the bedrock of the entire global financial system.
That completely flips the script for me. The government doesn't just owe money to them, they owe it to us.
We are our own creditors. That's the exact phrase the text used. Think about it. If the government were to just decide not to pay to default, it wouldn't just be sticking it to some foreign adversary.
No, it would be wiping out the retirement savings of its own teachers.
Teachers, firefighters, office workers, everyone.
That makes it a closed loop in a way that I just hadn't considered before. It's not just money leaving the building forever, it's money cycling through our own economy.
And that leads to probably the most profound definition I found in our source text today. It describes national debt not as a simple financial transaction, but as money the country has borrowed from its own future.
Borrowed from its own future. Can we dig into that? Because that sounds almost philosophical.
It is philosophical, but it's also deeply mechanical. When a government issues a bond, they are taking cash that exists right now from investors and promising to pay it back with tax revenues that will be collected later.
Right.
So they're essentially pulling resources from the year 2035 or 2040 into 2024.
So we are basically time traveling with money. We're taking the prosperity of tomorrow and spending it today.
Exactly. And the big question, the one that determines if this time travel is a brilliant idea or a complete disaster, is what you do with those resources once you pull them into the present.
Right. And we're going to get to the ethics of what we buy that whole trampoline versus the pit concept in just a minute. But before we do that, I feel like I have to address the elephant in the room.
The numbers.
The sheer size of the bill, the trillions, because I can hear you, the listener, right now saying, okay, maybe I'm lending the money to myself via my pension, but we're still talking about numbers that are impossible to comprehend. When I see 34 trillion, my brain just shuts off. It feels completely meaningless.
And that is because, in isolation, it is meaningless. This is one of the most important takeaways from our deep dive today. The raw number, the total count of dollars owed, tells you almost nothing about the health of the economy.
The sources give a really great analogy for this to help us visualize it. They introduce us to two characters to explain why context is king here. I think the outline referred to them as the student and the billionaire.
Right. This is simply the best way to demystify all those zeros. I want you to imagine a debt of $100,000. Just focus on that number. $100,000.
Okay.
Now, imagine the debt belongs to a college student. Let's call him Sean.
Okay, I'm picturing Sean. He's 20 years old. He has no job, no real income. Maybe he works part-time at a coffee shop making lattes. $100,000 isn't just a number to Sean. It's a catastrophe.
It's panic. Absolute panic. He is drowning. He probably can't even pay the monthly interest on that loan with his coffee shop wages.
Yeah.
That debt is an anchor around his neck that will drag him down for decades.
Okay, now take that exact same debt, $100,000, and give it to Elon Musk.
Right. For Musk, what is that? That's barely a rounding error. It's the cost of a very nice business lunch and a private flight. He could pay it off by checking his couch cushions.
So the number of the 100 grand didn't change at all. But the situation is completely opposite. For one person, it's literal bankruptcy, and for the other, it's just Tuesday.
Precisely. And that is exactly why economists don't panic about the total number of trillions in the national debt. They don't look at the raw price tag. They look at the debt-to-GDP ratio.
Okay, let's unpack GDP real quick. For anyone who hasn't taken Econ 101 in a while, we hear it on the news constantly. But what does it actually represent in this context?
Think of GDP, gross domestic product, as the country's salary. It is the total market value of all the goods and services produced within the country's borders in a specific time period.
Yeah.
It essentially represents the country's ability to generate income.
So just like a bank looks at my annual salary before giving me a mortgage to see if I can actually make the monthly payments, the global market looks at a country's GDP.
Correct. The source material highlights this ratio as the ultimate key metric. It's not about how much you owe, it's about how much you owe relative to how much you can make. If your salary, GDP, is huge and growing, you can carry a massive amount of debt quite safely.
And there was a golden rule mentioned in the text about this, right? It sounded a little mathematical, something like R must be less than G.
Yes, this is the fundamental formula for sustainability. R is less than G. It stands for interest rate versus growth rate.
Break that down for us. What are the R and the G doing?
So R is the interest rate the government pays on its debt. G is the growth rate of the economy as a whole. The rule is surprisingly simple. If the country's economy grows faster than the interest on the debt accumulates, the country can theoretically stay in debt forever.
Forever. See, that seems so counterintuitive. Because my dad always told me the ultimate financial goal is to be debt-free.
For a household, yes, absolutely.
Mm.
But for a sovereign nation, no. Think of it this way. If the economy grows by 3% this year, but the interest on the debt is only 2%, the debt burden is actually getting lighter relative to your income.
Even though the raw number of debt is technically going up.
Exactly. You are growing your way out of it without ever actually paying the balance down to zero.
So as long as the pie is getting bigger faster than the slice we owe is growing, we are safe.
In a macroeconomic sense, yes. This is why you hear politicians and economists obsess over growth. Growth is the magic ingredient that makes the entire math problem work.
Which is a perfect segue, because if the goal is to grow the economy so we can handle the debt, then what we spend that borrowed money on matters a lot. You can't just burn the money and expect the economy to grow.
It matters more than anything else. And this brings us to the ethics part of our deep dive, the vital distinction between good debt and bad debt.
And honestly, this felt very relatable to personal finance, just on a massive scale. The source material draws a hard line in the sand here. Not all borrowing is created equal.
Not at all. It creates two distinct categories, investment versus consumption. Or, to use the metaphor we started the show with, the trampoline versus the pit.
Let's look at good debt first. The trampoline. The source lists some very specific examples for this. Building a bridge, installing high-speed internet infrastructure, or training doctors.
What links all of those things together? They are investments in future productivity. Let's take the bridge example. It's a classic.
Okay, we borrow $1 billion to build a new bridge. That's a lot of debt.
It is a lot of debt. But once that bridge is built, what happens next?
Well, people drive on it.
Right. But more than that, it cuts travel time for thousands of delivery trucks. It connects a growing city to a major port. It allows businesses to move goods faster and cheaper. It allows workers to commute to better-paying jobs.
So the whole economy speeds up. Businesses make more profit, workers earn higher wages.
And because of that increased economic activity, the government collects more tax revenue. Over 20 or 30 years, that bridge generates significantly more wealth for the country than the cost of the interest on the original loan.
The debt literally pays for itself.
Exactly. It acts like a trampoline.
Yeah.
You push down into debt momentarily to bounce much higher in the future. You are ultimately richer because you borrowed that money.
But then there's the dark side, bad debt.
Yes. This is what the source refers to as consumption.
The examples here in the reading were a bit grimmer. It talked about borrowing just to pay current official salaries, or borrowing to buy food or fuel simply because the domestic economy is failing.
This is the debt pit. When you borrow just to keep the lights on today, you aren't building anything for tomorrow. There is no asset left over when the money is gone.
The phrase the source used that really stuck with me was eating the future.
It's a chilling image, isn't it?
It really is. It reminds me of the pizza analogy. Like, if I borrow money to build a factory, I have a factory. But if I borrow money to buy a pizza...
You eat the pizza.
Yeah.
It's gone. You enjoyed it for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But the debt remains on your credit card statement. And now you have to pay interest on a pizza you ate last month. You are objectively poorer than you were before.
And doing that on a national level, eating the future, that is what leads to real trouble. If a government keeps borrowing just to consume, they aren't creating that growth we talked about.
Right, G goes down. But R, the interest rate keeps coming due. It creates a vicious cycle where you have to borrow more money just to pay off the interest from the last time you borrowed money without ever increasing your actual ability to pay. That is the trap.
So if a country finds itself in that trap, or honestly, even if they're just managing normal debt, how does it end? I mean, does a country ever just write a giant check for the full amount and say, okay, we're done, account closed?
Almost never. The source material reveals a bit of a secret about sovereign debt. States rarely pay their debt down to zero. It's not even the goal.
That feels so weird to wrap my head around. If I did that, if I just kept my credit card balance open forever, I'd be in serious trouble. But for a country, it's a standard procedure.
It is entirely standard. It's a process called refinancing, or as it's often called, rolling over the debt.
How does that work mechanically? Because on the surface, it sounds a little bit like a Ponzi scheme if you don't look closely.
It can definitely look that way to a layperson. But here is the actual mechanism. Remember those bonds we talked about? Let's say a 10-year bond comes due today. The government has to pay the investor back their original principal.
Okay, so the government needs a chunk of cash right now.
But they don't take it out of today's tax revenue. Instead, they issue a new bond to a new investor. They take the cash from the new guy and use it to pay off the old guy.
Wow. Literally robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Constantly. They roll the debt over again and again across generations.
Okay, I have to ask, that sounds incredibly fragile. What keeps that cycle spinning? Why does the new guy keep showing up with cash every time a bond comes due?
One word: trust, or belief, if you prefer. The entire global financial system is predicated on the belief that the country can and will pay its debts. As long as investors believe the country is stable, like our Elon Musk example, they're more than happy to lend money because it's a safe place to park their cash.
But what happens if that trust evaporates? Let's say a country has been eating the future way too much. They are spending all their borrowed money on pizza and none of it on bridges.
That is the ultimate risk factor. If investors look at a country and say, you know what, your economy isn't growing, your politics are unstable, I don't actually think you can pay me back.
Then what? They just stop buying the bonds.
Or, more likely, they demand a massive reward for taking on that extra risk. They demand huge interest rates.
They say, I'll lend to you, but I want 10% interest instead of 2%.
Exactly. And suddenly your interest payments explode. It consumes your entire national budget. You can't pay for schools or roads because you're just paying interest to bondholders. It spirals completely out of control.
And if the country literally cannot find anyone to lend them money to pay off the old debts,
Then you hit the wall. The credit tap turns off completely.
and that wall is default.
Default, yes. State bankruptcy.
We hear that word thrown around on the news as a political threat sometimes, but what does it actually look like on the ground? Is it just a bureaucratic paperwork problem?
Oh, no. The sources describe it as an absolute catastrophe. Once a country defaults, no one wants to lend to them anymore. You are instantly cut off from the global financial system.
So the government has to balance its budget overnight.
Instantly. Imagine if you lost your credit cards, your mortgage, and your car loan, all at exactly the same time, and you could only spend exactly what you had in your pocket that day.
So the government just stops paying people.
Soldiers don't get paid. Pensioners don't get their checks. Imports stop coming in because your currency collapses on the global market. It creates massive social unrest and sudden deep poverty. It forces the country to make drastic, painful cuts immediately.
So it's clearly not just a financial spreadsheet error. It's real-world pain for everyday citizens.
It is. It's a complete loss of financial sovereignty. You are suddenly at the mercy of whoever is willing to bail you out.
Wow. So let's zoom out for a second and look at the big picture. We've gone from these scary, spinning debt clocks in New York to understanding that debt is really just a tool. It's a lever.
A lever that can lift you up like a trampoline or crush you down in a pit.
Right. We learned that we aren't borrowing from scary foreign overlords nearly as much as we are borrowing from our own pension funds. And we learned that the raw number of trillions doesn't matter as much as the debt-to-GDP ratio. The whole "are we the student or are we Elon Musk" question.
And crucially, are we building bridges or are we just buying lunch?
That's the big one for me, the good debt versus bad debt, the difference between a long-term investment and short-term consumption.
That's really what I hope you take away from this. When you hear about national debt in the news or you see politicians arguing about spending packages, don't just react to the big scary number. Ask those two questions.
Question 1. What is the ratio to GDP? Is the debt growing faster than the economy?
And question 2, what exactly are they spending the money on? Is this a bill for infrastructure and education that will pay us back in the future? Or is it for administrative bloat and short-term fixes?
It changes the way you read the headlines completely. Instead of just feeling anxiety, you can actually analyze the strategy. You can look at it and say, okay, that's a lot of money, but it's for a new energy grid, so that's a future asset. Versus, that's a lot of money just to patch a temporary hole in the budget.
It empowers you to demand better answers from leadership. It's not about the idea that debt is always bad. It's about recognizing that wasteful debt is dangerous.
Before we go, I want to leave everyone with a final thought that kind of builds on that borrowing from the future concept we touched on earlier.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Well, if we accept that debt is literally pulling resources from tomorrow into today, and if we use that money for bad debt, just consumption, eating the future.
Then we are leaving the bill to someone else entirely.
Exactly. Are we essentially stealing prosperity from a generation that hasn't even been born yet? If we eat the pizza today and leave our grandkids with the check, that's a really heavy moral question to sit with.
It brings the ethics right back into the economics. We are spending their money. We better make sure we're buying them a bridge they can actually use and not just a lunch we already ate.
That is definitely something to think about next time you see the debt clock ticking. Thank you so much for helping us break this all down today.
My pleasure. It's always good to look under the hood.
Stay curious, everyone. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.